Today we're going to be talking about overcoming rage. It's a pretty heavy topic. My favorite things to talk about are the things that don't often get talked about. So that's what we're doing today. We're broadcasting on Sober Now's Facebook page. If you haven't been there yet, please head on over and give that a like. You'll get notifications for all the cool material that we put up there each week. We're also joined on juicehelp.com today, live streaming from there, and welcome all of your questions, comments, insights. What's worked for you? What's your experience? Love hearing from you. So to get into this, lots of us struggle with identifying, coping, expressing the different emotions that we experience, particularly in early recovery. I think that's true for all of us. And some emotions are harder to manage and express than others, and rage is definitely a big part of that. So we're going to get into that. I have always loved the adage that the good thing about being sober is you feel more, and the bad thing about being sober is you feel more. So I totally get it. When I talk with people in early recovery, I'll ask them, how you doing? And they'll say something like, I'm great except for all these emotions. Or they'll talk about being emotional. And it's always interesting to me when people in recovery talk about being an emotional, it's like they're referencing having the flu or some kind of condition where, sorry, you got to bear with me, I'm just emotional right now. Emotions are very natural, of course, and they're not something to apologize for, but they are something that we avoided very strongly while we were in active use. We've used all manner of different things to distract ourselves from ourselves, to block out thoughts, feelings, and memories that we find painful, and rage is typically associated with all of those. So I'm still a mix of old school and new school, and what I mean by that is, as a counselor for substance use disorder, I always say let's put your pathway to recovery, and of course we honor all pathways to recovery. Let's put that ahead of any consideration of doing mental health work. The fields that I work in professionally tend to reinvent the wheel every 5 or 10 years when it comes to dual diagnosis work. But I favor, let's put abstinence, medicated assisted treatment, harm reduction, whatever your go-to is for overcoming the disease. That needs to be first and foremost, focusing on getting your basic life needs met, having housing security and food security. All the things that are most vital to life need to be a focus for us. Long before we start looking at our past or our childhood, I'll usually tease folks that I serve and say, if your ass is on fire today, it really doesn't make sense to me to examine your past. So let's build a foundation for your recovery before we go rooting around in mental health. Now, the one exception to that is a lot of us, as soon as we get sober, we struggle to feel safe. And that is, of course, an enormous trigger. So I think it's really good, if you haven't already picked up some basic skills in grounding exercises and coping, basic coping skills, things that help you to feel safe in your body, in your mind, in your current environment. I think those are really important to talk about. And if you check out some of our past videos, we've talked about that a lot. Having a lot of support in your life, of course, is vital, and learning how to keep things in a healthy perspective and how to get them back in a healthy perspective when you lose it. All of these are things that I want a person to be working towards and attaining before we go looking at the past at all. But eventually, if we continue on a path to recovery, we reach a point where we find that continued growth really requires some outside support, some outside help, and it oftentimes requires addressing our mental health. This is a scary undertaking, I think, for almost all of us. The overwhelming majority of us are survivors of trauma. There's a lot that we would like to keep in the past, and quite often folks actually say to me, why bother talking about it? It's in the past. And what I'll say to them is, if things that happened in your past are still limiting you or hurting you in the present, then in a very real sense, they're not over. They're continuing to have a negative effect on your life. And so what we need to identify is, how do we resolve those inner conflicts? How do we address those unmet needs? How do we get you greater stability, greater serenity? And how do we identify each of those obstacles? I think for a lot of us, I always preach simplicity. So for an awful lot of us, I think it's as simple as we're afraid to get in touch with the pain that we've carried. We're afraid to open up because we're afraid of falling apart. We're people who tend to compartmentalize. We tend to stuff and bury things. And of course, the things that we bury don't want to stay buried. They keep coming up. Sometimes we have an awareness of things outside of ourselves that trigger those memories, that bring them to the forefront. Sometimes they feel like they're completely random and are just kind of coming up on their own. When I think about compartmentalizing, the metaphor that a counselor would often use is that you take that experience, the feelings you have about it, your thoughts about that, and metaphorically you kind of cram them into a little box, and then you bury that box way down deep. Of course, it doesn't stay there on its own. We have to keep holding it down. Most of us have a lot of practice doing this. We started doing it in our early childhood. And so it doesn't take any conscious energy to continue to repress emotions and memories. It's a big part of why we started using substances to cope. But it does rob us emotionally, physically. It's detrimental to our health to continue to repress negative emotions and past experiences. And so each of those compartmentalized boxes add up over the years. And I think of it as Pandora's box. Pandora's box, if you're not familiar, is a piece of mythology where opening this box would unleash chaos and destruction. So for a trauma survivor, because rage is always connected to trauma, opening up Pandora's box means exploring each of these little compartmentalized boxes. But what we're afraid of is if I start to open up, all of those boxes are going to come open and I'm just going to be totally flooded, totally overwhelmed. I'm going to fall apart. I'm not going to be able to put myself back together again. And this is actually some of the most common fears that I work with as a trauma therapist. Folks will say to me, I don't know who I'll be without all this pain. I don't know who I'll be without all this anger. And I'll tease them. I'll say you'll be the same jerk, but with a lot less pain and anger. So letting go of things that hurt us doesn't take away anything good. It doesn't result in losing an ability. It doesn't make us less of a person. It doesn't make us less empathic. If anything, it just makes us more free to become who we and our higher power most want us to be. It creates room in our lives to experience greater happiness and joy. But I think the bottom line is we're control freaks. Everything about us, we fight losing battles for self-control every day. What I say to folks is you can have far greater self-control through self-acceptance than you could ever have by fighting a battle with yourself. I think of me fighting with me is, that's a fight I can't win. And the way that I think about surrender with my higher power is that what I'm mostly giving up is the fight that I have with myself, which is a fight that I can't win anyway. What I've learned about control freaks is that there are people who are afraid. And unfortunately for most of us, fundamentally the ways that we learn to deal with fear are incredibly unhealthy. It comes, for most of us, it stems from our childhood. Kids who grew up in really healthy, well-adjusted families, when they were scared as young children, they were held, they were nurtured, they were made to feel safe. And for the rest of us, that's a really huge unmet need. Especially if you grew up in an environment where addiction was present, or abuse was present, or neglect was present. A lot of us just have these gaps, these kind of holes in our upbringing in which important developmental milestones weren't met because we weren't being cared for by people who could meet them. So what we're doing all these years later is looking at the foundation of our lives, getting those needs met. That takes a lot of creativity and a lot of spirituality, a lot of connection to good people, because it's hard. This is no small undertaking. So for survivors of trauma, what we're opening up in terms of rage is a very primal experience. It's hard to control, much less release. Honestly, I think for most of us early on, if we connect with rage, the very best that we can do is walk away. It's an overwhelming experience. There's a chance that we'll lose control. We're afraid of lashing out and hurting others. We tend to implode and take it out on ourselves. And this underscores why relapse prevention plans are so important. Trying to make a plan when you're overwhelmed is just too much. It's just too hard. So what I've found over the years is that a lot of us, as we start addressing our past, we encounter a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, and these are some of the biggest obstacles to ongoing recovery. And sadly, they're based on a distorted perception of self. They're what sick and selfish people taught us about our worth, about our place in the world. And sadly, tragically, really, the shame and guilt that most of us carry, it doesn't belong to us. It's not by virtue of things that we did so much as it's by virtue of things that were done to us. Childhood sexual abuse and other forms of trauma that children experience is incredibly common amongst people who live with substance use disorders, and it's incredibly common amongst those of us who are seeking long-term recovery. So to attend to those wounds requires an enormous amount of support and a great deal of patience and compassion with self. We who have such great empathy for others tend to lack compassion for ourselves. So I'm always asking folks to use the golden rule in reverse. Treat yourself the way you treat other people. And trust that this is an ongoing, just like addiction recovery, trauma recovery is an ongoing process, and it takes far more than it feels like it should. It is harder than hell, it is scary as hell, it hurts like hell, and honestly, the only reason that we do it is to get out of hell. When we reach a point that we're sick and tired of being sick and tired, when the intrusive thoughts or the nightmares or the flashbacks get to be too much, or when we just come to have this profound sense that I'm carrying so much pain and I'm tired of this baggage, I'm tired of how much it weighs me down, then and only then do we really tend to start this process. What I've learned about us is that when you stuff a memory and you bring it up, whether in therapy or elsewhere, it'll probably surprise you. If I buried a memory at let's say, something from when I was an 8-year-old boy, some of the trauma that I experienced was overwhelming to me. Chances are I dissociated, which is my brain just kind of checks out and says we're going somewhere else for a little while because this is just too horrible. I had an awareness that the experience was painful, that it was overwhelmingly scary, and I didn't have the support that I needed to cope with it, and so I just kind of stuffed those memories and those feelings. Later on, when those memories come out and I process them, they do not emerge as an adult's perspective. So if I'm talking about something that I experienced in my childhood, ideally I would have the perception and the understanding of being a 52-year-old man. But instead, what comes out initially is the understanding that an 8-year-old child would have. Because when we bury things, we don't examine them, we don't analyze them, and we don't apply the maturity that we've achieved as adults to those memories. So very often, when those memories first surface, we feel, say, and believe now the things that we did then. And most common of those is the idea that the abuse that I endured was my fault. And as an adult, I understand that there's no such thing as a bad kid. But when I was a kid, I needed to believe that I had some control over whether or not abuse would occur. And so I learned to blame myself. I internalized things that my abusers said to me. And again, so when those things surface, they will not surface as the understanding of an adult. And I see this as a really important reason to be super patient with yourself. It's a process, and it takes a lot. The fear of remembering the past is most often the experience of reliving the past. When we experience flashbacks, it's a lot more intense than a memory. A flashback feels like it's like you're literally reliving the experience. It feels like you're back there again. And something very similar occurs with nightmares and night terrors that are a product of trauma. I want to talk a little bit about what rage is composed of, because I think to the average person, rage is like anger on steroids. Now, there's a lot more to it than that. Anger is a normal, healthy emotion. Honestly, I don't think it's all that challenging to control anger, but a therapist would say to you, anger is most often a secondary emotion. And what that really means is that nobody is ever just angry. They're angry and they're hurt, they're angry and they're disappointed, they're angry and they're afraid. And so if we can identify what it is that we're really feeling, quite often people like me use anger to cover up our true feelings, because there's no vulnerability in anger. There is enormous vulnerability in expressing sadness or loneliness or fear or disappointment. All the things that I think most of us in recovery feel like we've already had enough for 10 lifetimes, and we get stuck in feeling like it's not fair that I have to keep re-experiencing this, remembering this. It's not fair that I have to keep feeling these things and going through the same pain. I think, again, one of the biggest challenges for us is that we continue to stuff, and the more that we do that, it creates pressure. That pressure is harmful to us holistically. It eats away at our GI systems. It causes neuroskeletal pain. Migraines, it's bad for us physically. Emotionally, of course, it stunts us and tends to lead to either withdrawal or isolating or pushing people away. It harms us in terms of sometimes we just get a case of the fuck-its. And sometimes that leads to relapse, and sometimes it leads to other forms of self-destruction. And what I say to folks I serve is, don't say it, say me. Because when we say fuck it, whatever it is, it's going to be something that harms us. Okay, so anger doesn't travel alone. There's always another emotion present. If you can identify the other emotion, then you can cope with it, you can ask support for it, and you can get your needs met. If you just stay with the anger, chances are very little is possible. But let's talk about what rage is. It's funny to me, the things that stick in my brain and how I use them later on in life as a therapist. So this one actually comes from 3rd grade science class. I remember, I was really ADD as a kid, still am. So what I remember of the science class was that there were dinosaurs and fossils and plants and things, and they got pushed way deep down under the surface of the earth, and they stayed there under a lot of pressure for a really long time, and that's how coal is made. And the coal got pushed even further down and stayed under even greater pressure for a super long time, and that's how diamonds are made. We stuff emotions, we compartmentalize memories and thoughts and experiences, and when I was saying metaphorically that you got that box that you put all those things in, the memory and the thoughts might stay in the box, but the emotions kind of leak out. And the emotions from all of those little boxes that we carry, they become very convoluted, and they've been under a lot of pressure for a long time, and they become rage. So to me, rage is 10 different emotional experiences, each of which is overwhelming individually, but it's 10 overwhelming emotional experiences occurring simultaneously. And honestly, it is a horribly toxic and destructive force. It's something that way too many of us carry. And of course, it eats away at us from the inside because it is toxic. A lot of us work very hard to hold it in because we are terrified of lashing out and hurting others. We are terrified of making other people feel the way that we have been made to feel. And this is a huge piece of the losing battle that we fight with ourselves. So, yes, rage contains anger, but it also includes sadness, disappointment, loneliness, emptiness, a whole lot of overwhelming emotions. And then it also includes emotions that people typically don't talk about. It includes emotions like betrayal. It includes emotional experiences like being violated. And these are some of the things that we struggle to identify. We don't want to feel this way. Sometimes we try to convince ourselves that we shouldn't feel this way, or we try to think our way out of feeling a particular way, and it never ever works. A lot of us get sent to anger management programs, and I've seen some programs that had some value, but in my experience, what anger management programs really teach us to do is to not be angry and to somehow just like be okay without giving us really significant ways or useful ways to release anger. Giving somebody really lame advice like punching a pillow, there's nothing satisfying about that, and there's no real release involved in it. The truth is, rage is a destructive force, and what it most often yields is destruction. And so we tend to self-destruct, and we tend to do things that are harmful and we justify it by saying, well, as long as I'm the only one that gets hurt, it's okay, which of course is not true. It's not okay for anyone to hurt you, and it's a responsibility for you not to hurt you. But again, this powerful, destructive force needs to be pulled apart a little bit at a time. One memory at a time, one emotional experience at a time. And that idea of Pandora's box opening up and I'm just going to fall apart and never going to be okay again. What any good trauma therapist can do is help you open up that box and just take one memory, just one little box, and then we're going to close that bigger box back down, because that's too much. Nobody can do all of that at once. It's hard to find somebody the truth is it's hard to find a good therapist, much less find a good trauma therapist. So if you're thinking about going into treatment or doing some work on trauma, first of all, get on a wait list now. COVID has increased the need for therapy and mental health services and substance use disorder counseling and services. It's through the roof. It's growing daily, and so if you're even on the fence thinking that maybe you should get some treatment, call now, get in touch with providers. And in terms of making sure that you find the right person, the hard part is you have to have a strong sense of what it is you need, and then you have to ask for it, and that can happen in the form of simply asking the clinician, do you have a lot of experience in supporting folks from trauma recovery? Do you have a lot of experience working with people who are dually diagnosed, meaning living with a substance use disorder and a mental health condition? And any therapist should be more than forthcoming in answering those questions. One of the things that I like to point out to folks is that everything you've learned in addiction recovery also will serve you well and will help you in trauma recovery. Anything that you've learned about accepting support, about growing spiritually, anything that you've learned about really anything that applies to 12 steps and their literature is absolutely applicable to trauma recovery. In my experience, any form of recovery, whether it's a substance use disorder, trauma, a mental health condition, an eating disorder, self-harm, whatever it is, for it to ultimately be successful, it has to be a transformative experience. And I'm tongue-tied today. For something to be transformative, then it is by definition spiritual. So everything that you've learned up until this point has great value, will serve you well, and will make trauma recovery more manageable. I think what the biggest challenge for most of us is that we have to learn how to be vulnerable, to allow ourselves to open up and express what we feel, and to be able to feel safe doing that. And I think that that takes a lot. I'm always encouraging folks to listen first, foremost, and always to their intuition. If you've survived trauma, then you have some instincts and some intuition that are far greater than what neurotypical people have. And if you, as my friends in recovery say, if you've been through a lot of shit, then what you have is a set of skills. And I bet most of us use those skills readily for the benefit of others. We know how to read people. We know how to read situations. We know how to manipulate and con and do all kinds of things. So our understanding of people and our ability to read situations, we'll use those as a protective measure, as a way to try to help friends and family or loved ones. We don't usually use them for our own benefit. And I think in terms of coming to have a greater sense of safety and coming to a place where we feel like we can trust really should be a matter of your intuition. Because it's a lot more efficient than anything else we use. Typically, when we're trying to build trust, we observe people for very long periods of time, and what we're looking for is, do their actions match up to their statements? Do they practice what they preach? And quite often we test them, we push buttons, we set them up, we look to see what happens if. And that's a really taxing, cumbersome, long process. Most anyone that I've served in any form of recovery has said to me, I hope you can be patient because I have trust issues. It's going to take me a long time to get comfortable with you. And what I say to folks is, I don't need you to trust me. I'll never ask you to do that. I need you to trust yourself. Because if you don't trust you, then determining who you can trust or which direction should you go or what advice should you take just is exponentially harder. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous makes reference to rigorous honesty. And I think, honestly, rigorous honesty is an ideal. It's something that we pursue. Chances are I'm always going to tell a white lie to protect somebody's feelings or to make life a little bit easier on myself. But what I say to the people I serve is, I don't think you'll find anything in this world worth lying to yourself about. Because as soon as you lie to yourself about anything, you undermine your ability to trust yourself in every part of your life. So if you trust you, then you know whether or not somebody's been put in your life by your higher power. You know whether or not something is healthy. You know that something might be painful or scary, but still beneficial and necessary. And so I think that's the best possible focus. I'm going to pause real quick and just look to see what we have for comments. Adam Daniels, thank you. Generally speaking, in one sense or another, aren't all humans control freaks? Yes. Yes. As a generalism, I would say that that's true. And then I think through the course of recovery and a lot of growth, there's a lot of things that we can come to terms with. The first one is the ways in which we seek control are typically unhealthy. Control is me not accepting powerlessness. I joke with my clients that the only thing I'm powerless over are nouns, people, places, and things. I have no control over them whatsoever. On my good days, the only thing I have control of is me. And on my bad days, on my great days, rather, I don't even really have that much control over me. I've given it to my higher power. And the third step prayer from AA actually serves me really well with that. So I think one of the toughest lessons to come to terms with spiritually is powerlessness. I've let go of control daily. Sometimes I take it back multiple times a day, but I keep letting it go because I know it's an illusion. I know that I want my higher power to be in control, not me, because what my higher power wants for me is only 1,000,000,000 times better than anything I think I want. My plans still don't work. My higher power's plans work really well. No matter how much I think I'm in control, no matter how well, maybe everything's going my way, what I've learned is the things that are really going to kick my ass are things that I couldn't have possibly seen coming, much less been in control of. I'm certainly not in control of COVID, and that's had a really damaging effect on my life. I don't have control over loved ones that I've lost recently. I don't have control over the health of a couple of real good friends of mine. I have 2 friends right now who are dying. I don't have control over that. The things that make my life the most unmanageable and the things that hurt me the most are things that I never had control over. I have control over my attitude, I have control over my choices, and the most important choice that I make on a daily basis is to reach out to kindred spirits, connect with people that my higher power has put in my path, and make sure that I'm not going through things alone. I can enjoy brief times of solitude, but after that, it's a real downhill run to isolation. And if I'm isolating, I'm just going to be vaguely mentally ill and really self-destructive. And I've proven that over and over again. And I don't want to have the kind of self-control where I rely just on me, because me and me aren't good company for long periods of time. So I stay connected to good people, and one of the big things that helps me in coping is music. And I think for people who haven't experienced rage, it probably sounds really strange, but angry music is very soothing to me when I've experienced or I'm wrestling with rage. I have a lot of different playlists that support my recovery, and some of them are really upbeat and laid back and easygoing, and it's just fun to listen to, and I love the lyrics. But when I'm struggling, I bear witness to a lot of suffering. I bear witness to an enormous amount of injustice. I work with other people's rage, and I've learned how to bear witness to pain without taking it on as my own. But still, every once in a while, I want to listen to something that kind of aligns with what I'm feeling. So a few quick recommendations. If you find that metal or really hardcore punk, or, just for lack of a better term, angry music, is soothing to you like it is to me, Korn, Coming Undone. Disturbs, Down with the Sickness, Drowning Pools, Let the Bodies Hit the Floor. Just a few quick suggestions about things that I have taken comfort in when I was working through difficult times and powerful emotions. It is soothing for me to hear other people's emotional experiences and to get little bit of relief. So if you're struggling with rage, I hope that you'll be patient with yourself. I hope that you'll reach out and get connected to kindred spirits who have similar experiences. I hope that you'll catch yourself making unhealthy comparisons between yourself and others. We tend to compare our insides to other people's outsides, and those folks that look like they have it all together, if you really knew what was going on in their head, you'd feel 1,000,000 times better about yourself right away. So, those are my thoughts, and the biggest thing is I want to connect with you. So, a few ways to do that. The first one is jim@sobernow.com. Just fire me off an email. What kind of questions do you have? What kind of resources do you need? What would you like to see covered in future talks? I'm going to be back here every Thursday about noontime, and I would love to be talking about things that you're struggling with in any form of recovery, but especially addiction recovery. Would love to have you check out our YouTube station, Sober Now, on youtube.com. give it a like and give it a subscription click. We put out video content about once a week, and there's over 90 videos there at this point on different topics relating to addiction recovery and trauma recovery. Would love to have you check out the website, sobernow.com. This is a limited time thing. I've been talking about it for a little while, but it's going to come to an end. Right now, a lifetime subscription can be purchased for just $99. A lot of exclusive content there, and a couple of courses there that are home study programs. One is for people who are seeking freedom from substance use disorder, and the second program is for affected others, those of us who have a loved one in active addiction. What's cool about those programs is that not only are they completely confidential, you can do them from home whenever you want to at your own pace, they also ensure complete anonymity. Like, I literally don't need to know your name to help you get set up with those programs. Too often we risk our careers or maybe our family situation by admitting that we have a problem with drugs or alcohol. And so I wanted to design something that kind of circumvents all of that and gives people an option to get help without anybody even potentially knowing that this is what we're doing. So that's it for today. Please, again, connect with me, share the video, let folks know that we're an ongoing resource and that we want to expand this conversation. And please, above all, take excellent care of yourself, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.